Hey there! So you're learning Spanish, right? And you've probably had that moment of frustration. You learn a rule for conjugating verbs, things are going great, and then another verb comes along and just breaks all the rules. Well, if that sounds familiar, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're cracking the code on those tricky, irregular verbs. So you start out, and it's awesome. You learn a verb like hablar. The endings are clean, they follow a perfect pattern, everything makes sense. And then tener walks in the door. All of a sudden, there's a random G in the yo form, and the stem is changing from E to E. It can seriously feel like the rules just went out the window. And that's the big question, isn't it? What is actually happening here? Is this just a random mess designed to make life difficult for learners? Do you really have to memorize every single verb from scratch? Well, let me put your mind at ease. It is not chaos. Behind almost all of this apparent randomness, there is actually a system. There are patterns that, once you learn to see them, make this whole thing so much easier to handle. The secret is, we can sort pretty much all of these tricky verbs into three main groups. First, we've got verbs that are only weird in the yo form. Then we have the super common stem-changing verbs. And finally, there's a small but famous group of true rule breakers. So let's break them down one by one. Okay, first up, let's talk about the simplest and most straightforward pattern of them all, the yo form change. You know, the name really says it all here. For these verbs, the only form you have to pay special attention to is the I form, the yo form. Every other conjugation, tú, él, nosotros, all of them, they just follow the normal rules you already know. Easy, right? Let's look at a perfect example. The verb poner, which means to put. Check this out. Pones, pone, ponemos. They all follow that regular ER verb pattern. But boom, right there at the top, the yo form switches to pongo. That's it. That one change is the only irregular part you have to learn for this verb. And you'll hear this in action all the time. Yo pongo la mesa. The verb is being used in a totally normal sentence. You just have to remember that little G when you're the one doing the action. All right, building on that, let's get to our next category. And this one is a big deal. These are the stem-changing verbs. You might have heard them called boot verbs, and you're about to see exactly why. So with these verbs, a vowel in the stem, that's the main part of the verb, it actually changes. An E might become an I, for example. But, and this is the crucial part, this change does not happen for the nosotros and vosotros forms. They stay regular. And this is where that boot verb nickname comes from. Take a look at cerrar, to close. The stem, ser, becomes cier for yo, tú, él, and ellos. But notice how nosotros and vosotros are left out. They stay outside of that change. Now, if you draw a line around the irregular forms, what does that look like? It's a boot. It's such a great visual trick to remember the rule. So when you say I close the door, it's yo cierro la puerta with that stem change. But if you were to say we close the door, it would be nosotros cerramos la puerta. No change at all. See the pattern now? All right, time for our final category. These are the rebels, the true individuals, the ones that just don't fit into any neat little box. These are the completely irregular verbs. For this small but really important group, there aren't any shortcuts. They don't have a simple yo form change or a predictable stem change. Each form is kind of its own unique thing, and they just have to be learned on their own. The good news is there really aren't that many of them. The absolute classic example is ir, to go. I mean, just look at this. The infinitive doesn't even have a V in it anywhere, yet the conjugations are voy, vas, va. There's no system to decode here. This is just pure memorization. But here's the thing, because they're so common, you'll hear them constantly. Nosotros vamos al cine. You've probably heard that phrase 100 times. And through all that repetition, these forms eventually just start to feel natural. Okay, we've broken down the three patterns. How about a quick check to see how it's all sinking in? Ready for a little practice? Okay, first one. How would you say I have a dog? Think back to that very first slide. What kind of irregularity does tener have in the yo form? Yes, yo tengo un perro. That's a classic yo form change with that little G just popping in. Nice. And the next one, you close the window. Remember, cerrar? Is the to form inside the boot or outside the boot?
That's right, cierras. The do form is totally inside the boot, so the stem changes from E to IE. You're already getting the hang of this.
So let's wrap this all up by putting this information into a simple, practical toolkit that you can use as you keep learning. So the number one thing to remember is that irregular verbs aren't just random. They have their own systems. Your job is to look for those three main types. Is it a yo form verb, a stem changer, or one of the true rule breakers? Always try to learn verbs in a full sentence because that gives them context. And finally, just remember that practice is what turns all this knowledge into instinct. You now have the framework to deconstruct and understand what once might have felt like just confusing chaos. The system is yours to use. So the only question left is, what verb are you going to tackle first?